Hey there, my friends. Welcome to another book review with Johnny Boy. And today we're discussing Keaton, the Man Who Wouldn't Lie Down by Dardis. Tom Dardis. And I guess this is him, the author. And it is about the legendary silent comic who then had decades in the sound film industry of a career as well, Buster Keaton. It's him in 1917, a movie called Coney Island. This book does have quite a few good photos. I'm seeing if I can find anything for you. Even when he was a child, because he was a famous child to a degree on vaudeville. And I'm gonna just, Buster's playing the banjo over there. Yeah, so let me just talk about this from my, shoot from the hip, like I usually do. I just go for it. Okay, Buster Keaton was born, I think it was 1895 or 96, mid-1890s, and into a vaudeville family. Dad and mom were in vaudeville, and then the legend is, as a child, as a baby, maybe a 1 year old or something, he crawls on stage, takes a bad spill, and everyone's like, oh my God, is he okay? And he gets up totally fine. And Harry Houdini, who was a part of that, the legendary magician, who was a part of that show, that traveling vaudeville circuit, saw it and said, oh, that boy took a real buster, like a fall, whatever. And somehow the name stuck. And then before long, 2 years old, 3 years old, he was like involved in the show. And like falling was the funny thing. And then eventually it was, his dad would throw him across the stage, and a lot of violence. By today's standards, certainly would be called abuse, but at that time it was semi-acceptable, and Buster learned how to fall like a champion, so like a pro. So at some point in New York City, when he was 8 or 9 years old, the authorities, because there was like a group that had enough power or concern when they got to New York, so he traveled around the country all his life, probably up in Canada a little bit, and then the authorities tried to stop, like, hey, this is child abuse, take off that boy's shirt, look at all the bruises he has from his dad abusing him on stage every night. Took off the shirt, no bruises. He looked like a totally normal kid, because he mastered the art of falling, which is something he made a lot of use out of in his silent film career, which started around 1917, somewhere around there, the 1910s, the latter half. He met this guy, Roscoe Arbuckle, also known as Fatty Arbuckle, just chance meeting on the street. Buster had kind of graduated from the family vaudeville, three Keatons. It kind of fell apart. His dad was a pretty nice guy, and kind of funny, interesting guy, despite the violent treatment, but a nasty drunk. So eventually the family was just, needed space from each other. So Buster was old enough to leave the family and move to New York, try to make it on his own. Kind of by accident, he got involved with film. This guy, Fatty Arbuckle on the street, Roscoe, said, hey, I'm filming tomorrow. I got a film company. You want to come and see how you do on the picture? Because Arbuckle had seen Keaton in his vaudeville days and was impressed, and was like, this would be great to have a guy like that in my movie. So, and of course, Keaton was like, yeah, let's try to be in a movie. So Roscoe Arbuckle became Keaton's mentor for some years and good friends. And then at some point, like, Arbuckle went to a different company, and Keaton kind of inherited that like smaller company that Arbuckle was kind of in charge of. making films. And so at some point, the films moved from New York to LA. And then, so we're in the early mid-20s. Keaton starts making big films with a big budget. His brother-in-law was his producer, and he was able to say, hey, I really got this great idea, and the brother-in-law would give him the money for it. And he trusted him. And Keaton was not good with numbers. Keaton basically never went to school. One day, maybe. So his school was the vaudeville stage and backstage and the boarding houses and the traveling. So he was not good with books. He was not good with numbers. He could read and stuff, but he was much more like a go by the gut type of guy. And he put his life on the line for movie making for at least a decade, I would say, from what we could tell. And from what I could tell from the book, like jumping onto moving trains or something like that, or letting the side of a house fall, and he stands in the exact precise spot in an empty window to make it look funny. But obviously, if it didn't work, he would be killed. Things like that. He just trusted it, and he loved these gags, and he was a perfectionist, which just kind of drove people crazy. But he was the type of guy that you just, this was Buster Keaton. It wasn't personal. So pretty much people had nice things to say about him. Later on, so he gets married kind of early in his young 20s or something, and in the early 20s, and he, or 1920, something like that. And so that's his first marriage. And they have 2 kids. Then they just kind of lose any sort of passion for each other, or the wife kind of kicks him out of bed. And he's just, seeing plenty of other girls because he's young and famous. And his wife literally said, you're not allowed in the bedroom anymore. So he's, fooling around here and there. He gets into bridge at some point, the card game, and he becomes a drinker, like his dad. What's the connection? Who knows? But he became an alcoholic, a pretty bad one. I don't think he became mean per se, but he would go on benders, and at some point just, days would be lost, and shooting days would be lost, and he would get in trouble. But that's kind of later on. So the silent era, I think, the worst of his troubles certainly didn't start yet, and he was still kind of not king of the hill. His competition was Charlie Chaplin, and I think a guy named Harold Lloyd. I think I got that name right. So Buster's movies were usually not as big as those, but they were making quite a bit of money, and people knew him around the country, and abroad too, France and other countries. There's, on the back here, there's something like a Russian poster. So he was getting around. That's with his first wife in New York City. Looks kind of like, something from F. Scott Fitzgerald at the same time. So by the time talkies began, which is 1928, 29, the industry is changing, and his backer, the producer, his brother-in-law, that relationship shifts, and he has I think it's MGM he gets hired by. So he's no longer doing his own Buster Keaton Productions, where he's kind of in charge of everything to a degree, and he can really make the movies he wants to make with big budgets and perfectionism to get exactly the gags that he wants to do. To now he becomes a staff member of MGM with a good salary at the time. He made a lot of money per week, but you could see he's always slowly but surely losing his autonomy and his freedom of creativity. His marriage falls apart. There's definitely some period around that in the 30s. Okay, the Great Depression starts happening, so it doesn't hit him directly, but society starts changing. his fortune in terms of like people thinking he's the best, he can do whatever he wants in movies, that changes. He now is just another kind of star player, but not necessarily the main star, you know. And yeah, so basically this is kind of downhill trajectory from the 30s. Downhill by whose standards, I don't know, but it's kind of painted that way, right? I don't think he died a miserable man or anything. He did live to his about 70 or something, late 60s, 70. And he had a third marriage at that time. And so basically, he never stopped working for too long. He stayed in movies. Silent film is his, like, you know, tour de force. That's like what he's known for. It's some really amazing stuff. He gets into sound movies. Some of them apparently pretty good. I didn't really see them yet. Some of them, whatever. There's a lot of what's called two reels, or like a lot of shorts that he's in from the late 1910s, early 20s, even in the 30s, I think 40s. There's these 15, 20-minute things that he does. I guess they were just putting him in theaters at the time. I don't know how that worked exactly, but must have been, right? But then, of course, he gets into TV at some point. By the 50s and the 60s, you're seeing he's in TV. And sometimes it's a part for, like he was in Twilight Zone episode, he was in Twilight Zone episode. He did a lot of different shows. There was like a Buster Keaton show for a brief amount of time, a year or something, on a local station in LA. So he wasn't like Frank Sinatra with his own show, or Bing Crosby, not like that. But he always stayed relevant to a degree, and so if it wasn't his acting skills, people wanted his gag ideas. Like for comedies, they would just hire him to give ideas on how to put a funny gag in a show. Sometimes as a writer, story writer, you know. So he was, relevant to his death. I'm sure he didn't feel always relevant, but somehow he hung in there. And even in the 50s, 60s, there was like these, remember the golden age of comedy type of movies that would come out, and Buster would be featured with Laurel and Hardy or Charlie Chaplin and this guy Harold Lloyd, and you know, people would kind of remember him because back then, let's say in the 50s or 60s, you know, if they weren't playing it in the theater or on TV, you're never going to see that old stuff. So now we have YouTube, and even 20 years, 30 years ago, we could still maybe find a VHS and stuff, but back then, if you were old news, you could literally be forgotten if there wasn't like something keeping you fresh in people's eyes, because it's in the theater, it's out of the theater, you know, and a lot of things didn't get replayed. So it was a totally different scene for actors back then. And remember, this guy didn't start out as an actor per se, kind of, in vaudeville. He was an entertainer. And the acting was a little more spontaneous. But anyway, I don't know what it was, but Buster Keaton stood out to me. I rented a video from the library a year or two ago. And I'm like, yeah, I heard about this guy, and I really want to see why is he so good. I rented The General. Maybe there are a couple others on the DVD. The General is this one with the train. And I was just blown away by his physical capabilities. Like, I knew he was legendary, and Chaplin never really spoke to me. I'm open to checking him out, but Keaton is, for the silent era, he makes one realize that silent film is still very much worth watching. Definitely check out The General. What was the other one? Steamboat Bill Jr. Silly name, but Steamboat Bill Jr. That's an awesome one. I mean, there was a lot of great. I haven't seen too many of his stuff, but whatever I saw. And 1 Week. That's where he gets married and builds a house. That's the one where the house almost falls on him, and great stuff. That's not that long. That's fun. You can watch that kind of quick. You can find it on YouTube. 1 week. Steamboat Bill Jr., The General. It's tons. So at the end of it, I finished the book a couple of days ago. There's a second wife who was a little bit strange, and that was at a time when Buster was pretty alcoholic and pretty depressed and pretty down his luck. And then this second wife was a nurse who helped him with his alcoholism. Then they got close, and like the relationship kind of began as his caretaker, and at some point they got sick of each other, and that was that. But he did find a third wife who I think was probably the love of his life. It seemed like true love at that point. Yeah, I mean, some funny stuff. Here's him later in life. Yeah, so he was in the Twilight Zone episode, and I wouldn't have fully realized that unless I did what I'm about to mention. So his third wife was a lot younger than him. I don't think she married him for the money. Maybe there was some consideration of that, but you know, he was a tough guy. He was a, you know, beautiful soul, but not an easy guy to deal with. So if you're gonna marry him and stick with him, you have to care about it. You know, I don't think he was that rich at that point anyway. So he did have money troubles throughout the years. Maybe he died rich. I hope so. But I don't know. Then, okay, so it ends. I finished it several days ago, page 278. And I'm like, there's a lot more pages left. And it's like 32 more pages of, or even more if you count, there's some other appendix stuff. But filmography was 32 pages. And I was like, I'm not going to skip 32 pages of the book. So I took time and read through the filmography. It goes from 1917, you know, and I'm not going to show you every page, but because it's, you know, there's shorts, silent Keaton feature films, sound feature films starring Keaton, sound feature films with Keaton and subordinate role. You know, there's like a whole bunch of stuff he did. Miscellaneous shorts, television credits. And then I found the Twilight Zone thing. I'm like, oh, that's why he looks so familiar, because I'm a Twilight Zone lover and I saw the episode with him a few times. It was a comedy episode. And it was funny about this janitor who goes back in time 100 years. No, goes forward in time because he's bored in the 1800s. There's a time machine and he goes forward about 100 years, and it was just too much and he wanted to get back. But there's some gags there. I'm like, this is really clever. And it's very super rare to have a comic episode of Twilight Zone, but lo and behold, it was Buster Keaton. And that's how they pulled it off. Because Buster Keaton, he's not just funny, you know. He's almost not funny. He's deadpan. He's you know, the subtitle is The Man Who Wouldn't Lie Down, but like I think there's a movie or a book about him called The Great Stone Face. So his thing is just like to look deadpan. At a certain point, like he would laugh when he was a kid when he got thrown around the stage, and the audience wasn't reacting the way they would if he just had a deadpan face. It was more funny to people. So his dad like told him, stop laughing, or don't, you know, cry, or whatever it was, just no face at all, and that the audience liked it. So he learned how to do that. So he became known for that. So like I said, he's a comic, but he has this melancholia that goes with it, and this pathos. It's more than just laughs with him. It's kind of feels deep, you know, but it is funny because the gags are so extreme, and what he puts his body through is so absurd that you have to laugh. Like, oh my God, he just did that? Like, he'll like be scared. Like, there's one called Haunted House or something. He got scared, and you see him jump on, like, he goes from the first floor to the second floor in like 3 seconds. You don't know how he got to the second floor. Like, whoa! his physical comedy is fantastic. So just for that, you got to give some of his shorts a try. You know, it's worth it. If you got this far in the video, it's worth it. Anyway, keep reading. Buster Keaton. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention is that this book was a page turner. I did not expect it. You know, I order books that I think, you know, I'm gonna like, and the ones that are relatively inexpensive, and they sit there and I get to them. Get to them. This one was like, it's a little thick. What if it's kind of dull? It wasn't super exciting, but I just wanted to read it. A lot of times I read 3 books at one time, but I just kept going back to this book and just kept plowing through, and I read it pretty quickly. So for me, it was an easy read. I like old Hollywood. I love that era of American history too, just kind of figure it out, and interesting people. He was, you know, and names like Charlie Chaplin and other names pop up that are of interest as well. Anyway, until next time, keep reading. Ciao.